Good evening, everyone. My name is Brian Nevin Napoleon, and today I'll be talking about the novel The Great Gatsby, written by Francis Scott Fitzgerald. Now, before we dive into the novel, we'll learn a little bit about the author. Francis Scott Fitzgerald was born on September 24th, 1896, in St. Paul, Minnesota. He was an intelligent child, however, he did poorly in his school and was sent to New Jersey at a boarding school. Later, he enrolled at Princeton in 1913. However, academic troubles and apathy plagued him throughout his time at college, so he had to drop out. He enlisted in the army in 1917. This was during the First World War. Now, when he was stationed at Camp Sheridan in Montgomery, Alabama, he met and fell in love with Zelda Sayer. With the publication of his work, This Side of Paradise, in 1920, Fitzgerald became a literary sensation, and most of his work is semi autobiographical. Now, a little bit about his personal life. Fitzgerald was considered the spokesman for his generation. By extension, he and his wife Zelda were incredibly famous during this time. Now, Zelda came from a very aristocratic background, and she wouldn't marry Scott until he published his first book, which in turn put pressure on Scott to continue his success. The couple lived a very lavish lifestyle. They also lived in Europe for a period of time. However, later turmoil became evident in their marriage as both of them suffered from constant stress, as well as both of them suffered from drinking problems and alcoholism. Scott worked continuously to support their lifestyle, and Zelda felt neglected. And in 1932, Zelda was diagnosed as schizophrenic and she had to be moved to a mental institution. She died in a hospital fire in 1948, and today she is seen as a tragic icon. Scott, on the other hand, was he was struggling with his drinking problem, and it left him in poor health. He went to work in Hollywood, which he found degrading, and he died of a massive heart attack in 1940. And it was only after his death did his works started to gain popularity. And today, he is recognized as one of the most influential American writers. Now, about the novel. So, The Great Gatsby is a 1925 novel written by Francis Scott Fitzgerald, and it talks about a cast of characters living in the fictional towns of West Egg and East Egg in Long Island. And the events here happened the summer of 1922. Many critics consider this novel as to be one of the greatest novels Gatsby has ever written. Um and also, this novel talks about the mysterious millionaire Jay Gatsby and his unrealistic passion and obsession to reunite with his ex-lover Daisy Buchanan. And this novel also uh, represents the cultural age that is in the 1920s, which is also known as the Roaring Twenties, and is also a cautionary tale regarding the American dream. Now, before we jump into the story of the novel, we have to understand a few key concepts. That is, the first one is the American dream. Now, what it is, now the American dream is basically the national ethos of the United States. Now, this includes the freedom of opportunity, the equality of opportunity, as well as the prosperity and success of each and every individual. It promotes social mobility no matter whatever the social circumstance a person is faced. You have an equality of opportunity. The rest depends on how you use it. That means if you are able to work hard, social mobility is possible. And this idea, the American dream, is enshrined in the US Constitution, the preamble, where it states that to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Next is the Jazz Age. So, the Jazz Age is basically a period from the 1920s to the 1930s, in which jazz music as well as dance styles related to it started to gain nationwide popularity in the United States and to a lesser extent around the world. Now, the jazz age, apart from being popular for jazz music, is there are also many cultural repercussions that were felt in the United States. And talking a little bit about its history, it originated in New Orleans as a fusion between African and European music. And it played an important part in the cultural changes that occurred in this period. Now, this age, it often coincides with the Roaring Twenties in the United States, and we'll be talking about that a little bit in a moment. And this was also during the time that prohibition was in place. Now, basically, prohibition is a law or a piece of legislation that stops or that is prevents the legal production, sale of alcohol. So this is what the 1920s were known for, and it was in fact the American author Francis Scott Fitzgerald who was credited with coining the term the Jazz Age in his 1922 short story collection, The Tales of Jazz Age. Now, the Roaring Twenties. So basically, what the Roaring Twenties is, it describes the decade of 1920s in Western society and Western culture. Now, it was a period of economic prosperity. We see mass production. So this is immediately after the First World War. So there was mass production, new consumerism. There were development of automobiles, telephones, movies, radios. Aviation was a booming business during this time. And nationwide, people start to experience economic growth. This was all driven by a huge consumer demand as well. And there were changes to lifestyle. Now, this was also the time when celebrity culture started to take the form that we know as it is today. And this period, the Roaring Twenties, is often described as the period where we had a break with tradition and we started moving into modernity. Now, the capitalist of the Great Gatsby. Now, first we have Nick Carraway, the narrator of the novel. He moves from the Midwest to New York to learn the bond business. Jay Gatsby lives next to Nick in a mansion. He throws huge parties, completed with catered food, open bars, orchestras. People from everywhere attend these parties, but no one seems to know much about the host. Daisy Buchanan, who was a shallow girl, is the embodiment of Gatsby's dreams. John Buchanan is the husband of Daisy, a cruel man who lived life irresponsibly. And Jordan Baker, a cynical and coincited woman who cheats in golf, wants Nick to go out with her. And finally, we have Myrtle Wilson, the woman whom Tom has an affair with and abandons when he becomes uninterested in her. So finally, we'll get into the novel. So The Great Gatsby is a portrait of American society during the 1920s. It features Jay Gatsby, who's a person who went from rags to riches, only to find out that his newfound wealth does not afford him the privileges of those born into the upper class. So Gatsby hosts lavish parties at his beautiful Gothic mansion in the neighborhood of West Egg in New York. Now, this neighborhood, the neighborhood of West Egg, is the area of the nouveau riche, or people who have recently acquired wealth and become rich. This area is particularly known for people who lack social connections and vulgarly flaunt their wealth. Gatsby's neighbor, Nick Carraway, narrates the novel. Now, Nick comes from a prominent Midwestern family, but he was educated at Yale University and moved to New York to work as a bond salesman. Nick, like Gatsby, lives in West Egg, and upon arriving in New York, Nick visits his cousin Daisy Buchanan and her husband Tom. The Buchanans live in the posh neighborhood of East Egg, Long Island. Like Nick, Tom Buchanan graduated from Yale University and comes from a privileged Midwestern family. Tom is obsessed with the preservation of class boundaries. Daisy, in contrast, is a ghost like young woman dealing with a sophisticated kind of boredom. While there, Nick meets Jordan Baker, a golf professional and a socialite. The two later become romantically involved. Jordan tells Nick that Tom is having an affair with a woman named Myrtle Wilson. Uh, this woman called Myrtle Wilson lives in a place called the Valley of Ashes, which is an industrial wasteland outside New York City. Later that night, Nick's, Nick goes to his home at West Egg, where he sees Gatsby standing in his backyard, gazing at a mysterious green light across the bay. Soon after, Tom decides to take Nick to New York City. They stopped first at the garage owned by George Wilson, the husband of Myrtle Wilson. Tom and Myrtle have been having an affair, and he tells Myrtle to join them later in the city. While in the city, Tom asks Nick and Myrtle. While in the city, Tom takes Nick and Myrtle to his apartment in the Morningside Heights, where he maintains. Uh, while they were in the city, Tom takes Nick and Myrtle to the apartment that is located in Morningside Heights. This is where uh, the affair takes place. Now, they were having a party over there, and the more Myrtle drinks, the more aggressive she becomes. She starts to taunt Tom by talking about Daisy, and how he reacts by slapping her and breaking her nose. The party comes to an abrupt end, and Nick attends a lavish party in Gatsby's mansion later that week, where he runs into Jordan. And at the party, few of the attendees know Gatsby, and Nick had never met Gatsby prior, but now sees that he's a handsome and slightly disillusioned young man. At this point in the novel, Gatsby's origins are unclear. He claims to have come from a wealthy San Francisco family and said that he was educated in Oxford and claims to be a decorated veteran of the Great War. Gatsby mysteriously avoids the Buchanans but asks Nick to arrange a meeting between him and Daisy upon meeting Gatsby. Upon their meeting, Gatsby gives Daisy a tour of his mansion, desperately exhibiting his wealth. They both began an affair. Jordan later explains to Nick that Gatsby first fell in love with Daisy in Louisville before the war. Eventually, Nick learned the true story of Gatsby's past. He was born as James Gatz in North Dakota, but legally changed his name in while he was 17. The gold baron and voyager Dan Cody served as Gatsby's mentor until his death. The baron introduced Gatsby to the world of wealth, power, and privilege. For Tom, however, Gatsby was part of the nouveau riche, who passes as a danger to the old order of aristocrats. When Tom accompanies Daisy to Gatsby's party, he acts very rudely. Nick realizes that Gatsby wants Daisy to renounce Tom and her marriage to him. Meanwhile, Daisy invites Gatsby, Nick, and Jordan to lunch at her house in an attempt to make Tom jealous and to take revenge because of his affair with Myrtle. Daisy tells Gatsby that she loves him while Tom is within earshot. Tom becomes furious and he forces the group to drive into the city. There, at a suite at the Plaza Hotel, Tom and Gatsby have a bitter confrontation with each other. Tom denounces Gatsby for his low birth and tells Daisy that Gatsby acquired his wealth through illegal means. Daisy's true allegiance is to Tom, and when Gatsby begs her to say that she does not love her husband, she refuses. Tom permits Gatsby to drive Daisy back to East Egg. Gatsby allows Daisy to drive his car. While passing through George's garage, Daisy accidentally turns Gatsby's car to avoid another car. In the meantime, killing Myrtle, and Myrtle died in the spot instantly. George, driven mad by the death of his wife, is on the search to find her killer. Tom tells him that Gatsby was the one driving the car that day. He later shoots Gatsby before committing suicide. After the murder, the Buchanans leave town, and Nick is left to organize Gatsby's funeral. Very few people attend Gatsby's funeral. Among the group includes Gatsby's father, Henry Gatz. From Henry, Nick learns Gatsby's grandiose plan for his self improvement and rise to power. Disgusted with the life in New York, Nick returns to his home in the Midwest. Coming to the themes that are presented in this novel, the first one is hope. It is represented by the light across the bay that Jay Gatsby was fixated on. It was the embodiment of his sole goal in life, which was a reunification with Daisy. Success. Gatsby felt that the only way he would win Daisy was through his money. Ignorance. The characters have little self knowledge and even less knowledge of each other. Judgment. Nick misinterprets the advice of his father and tries not to judge people. And finally, disillusionment. Gatsby dreams of getting back together with Daisy, even though she is married and has a daughter. Some more themes that are dealt with include morals. The morals of people with great wealth seem to be less than desirable, but many times are more socially acceptable than lower classes. Effect of wealth. Wealth is depicted as selfish and shallow, and carelessness. Accidents don't understand that actions have consequences. Now, some of the moral lessons that we can learn from this novel is that money cannot buy happiness. You cannot relive the past. If dreams are too fantastic and reality cannot keep up with ideas, they are usually not fulfilled. Life is paradoxical. Aspects and attitudes seem to contradict. So that's it for now, and we'll meet later. Thank you.